This is from the book Bartholomew de las Casas, a short account of the destruction of the Indies. And I'm going to read from page 10. This is when they came here, Christopher Columbus and Murder Incorporated, to the shores of Central and South America. It says, talking about the people, the indigenous ones that was here. That's why you hear me say indigenous, meaning the ones that was here first. They are innocent and pure in mind and have a lively intelligence. You hear that? So we have a lively intelligence. All of which makes them particularly receptive to learning and understanding the truths of our Catholic faith and to being instructed in virtue. Indeed, God has invested them with fewer impediments in this regard than any other people on earth. Once they begin to learn of the Christian faith, they become so keen to know more, to receive the sacraments, and to worship God, that the missionaries who instruct them do truly have to be men of exceptional patience and forbearance. And over the years, I have time and again met Spanish laymen who have been so struck by the natural goodness that shines through these people that they frequently can be heard to exclaim, "These would be the most blessed people on earth if only they were given the chance to convert to Christianity." That's something. I'm going to read that again. This is what they said about it. These would be the most blessed people on earth if only they were given the chance to convert to Christianity. It was upon these Gentile lambs, it was upon these gentle lambs, Gentile, and Gentile fit so close together that I said gentle, but it's a Gentile, but it says it was upon these gentle lambs, imbued by the Creator with all the qualities we have mentioned, that from the very first day they clapped eyes on them, the Spanish fell like ravening wolves upon the foe, or like tigers and savage lions who have not eaten meat for days. The pattern established at the outset has remained unchanged to this day, this certain pattern. And the Spaniards still do nothing save tear the natives to shreds, murder them, and inflict upon them untold misery, suffering and distress, tormenting, harrowing and persecuting them mercilessly, without any mercy. We shall immerse describe some of the many ingenious methods of torture they have invented and refined for this purpose. But one can get some idea of the effectiveness of their methods from the figures alone. When the Spanish first journeyed there, the indigenous population of the island of Hispaniola stood at some 3 million. Today, only 200 survive. From 3 million to 200. The island of Cuba, which extends for a distance almost as great as the separating Valladolid from Rome, is now to all intents and purposes uninhabited. And two other large, beautiful and fertile islands, Puerto Rico and Jamaica, have been similarly devastated. Not a living soul remains today on any of the islands of the Bahamas, which lie to the north of Hispaniola and Cuba, even though every single one of the 60 or so islands in the group, as well as those known as the Isles of Giants and others in the area, both large and small, is more fertile and more beautiful than the Royal Gardens in Seville, and the climate is as healthy as anywhere on earth. The native population, which once numbered some 500,000, was wiped out by forcibly expatriation to the island of Hispaniola, a policy adopted by the Spaniards in an endeavor to make up losses among the indigenous population of that island. One God-fearing individual was moved to mount an expedition to seek out those who had escaped the Spanish straw and were still living in the Bahamas, and to save their souls by converting them to Christianity. But by the end of a search lasting 3 whole years, they had found only the 11 survivors I saw with my own eyes. A further 30 or so islands in the region of Puerto Rico are also now uninhabited and left to go to wreck and ruin as a direct result of the same practices. All these islands, which together must run to over 2,000 leagues, are now abandoned and desolate. On the mainland, we know for sure that our fellow countrymen have, through their cruelty and wickedness, depopulated and laid waste an area which once boasted more than 10 kingdoms. Hear that? On the mainland, we know for sure that our fellow countrymen have, through their cruelty and wickedness, depopulated and laid waste an area which once boasted more than 10 kingdoms, each of them larger in area than the whole of the Iberian Peninsula. The whole region, once teeming with human beings, is now deserted over a distance of more than 2,000 leagues of distance. That is greater than the journey from Seville to Jerusalem and back again. At a conservative estimate, the deported and diabolical behavior of the Christians has, over the last 40 years, led to the unjust and totally unwanted deaths of more than 12 million souls, women and children among them. And these are grounds for believing my own estimate of more than 15 million to be near the mark. See, not 12 million, but 15 million to be near the mark. There are two main ways in which those who have traveled to this part of the world pretending to be Christians have uprooted these pitiful peoples and wiped them from the face of the earth. First, they have waged war on them, unjust, cruel, bloody, and tyrannical war. Second, they have murdered anyone and everyone who has shown the slightest sign of resistance or even of wishing to escape the torment to which they have subjected him. This latter policy has been instrumental in suppressing the native leaders, and indeed, given that the Spaniards normally spare only women and children, it has led to the annihilation of all adult males, whom they habitually subject to the harshest and more iniquitous and brutal slavery that man has ever devised for his fellow man, treating them, in fact, worse than animals. All the many and infinitely varied ways that have been devised for oppressing these peoples can be seen to flow from one or other of these two diabolical and tyrannical policies. The reason the Christians have murdered on such a vast scale and killed anyone and everyone in their way is purely and simply greed. They have set out to line their pockets with gold and to amass private fortunes as quickly as possible, so that they can then assume a status quite at odds with that into which they were born. The insatiable greed and overweening ambition know no bounds. The land is fertile and rich, inhabited simple, forbearing, and submissive. The Spaniards have shown not the slightest consideration for these people, treating them, and I speak from first-hand experience, having been there from the outset, not as brute animals. Indeed, I would to God they had done and had shown them the consideration they afford their animals, so much as piles of dung in the middle of the road. They have had as little concern for their souls as for their bodies. All the millions that have perished, having gone to their deaths with no knowledge of God and without the benefit of the sacraments. One fact in all this is widely known and beyond dispute, for even the tyrannical murderers themselves acknowledge the truth of it. The indigenous people never did the Europeans any harm. Read it again. The indigenous peoples never did the Europeans any harm whatsoever. On the contrary, they believed them to have descended from the heavens, at least until they or their fellow citizens had tasted at the hands of these oppressors a diet of robbery, murder, violence, and all other manner of trials and tribulations. Hispaniola. As we have said, the island of Hispaniola was the first to witness the arrival of Europeans, and the first to suffer the wholesale slaughter of its people and the devastation and depopulation of the land. It all began with the Europeans talking native women and children, It all began with the Europeans taking native women and children, both as servants and to satisfy their own base appetites. Then, not content with what the local people offered them of their own free will, and all offered as much as they could spare, they started taking for themselves the food the natives contributed to produce by the sweat of their brows, which was in all honesty little enough, since what a European will consume in a single day normally supports 3 native households of 10 persons, each for a whole month. And since the newcomers began to subject the locals to other vexations, assaults, and iniquities, people began to realize that these men could not, in truth, have descended from the heavens. Some of them started to conceal what food they had. Others decided to send their women and children into hiding. And yet others took to the hills to get away from the brutal and ruthless cruelty that was being inflicted on them. The Christians punched them, boxed their ears, and flagged them in order to track down the local leaders. And the whole shameful process came to a head when one of the European commanders raped the wife of the paramount chief of the entire island. It was then that the locals began to think up ways of driving the Europeans out of their lands and to take up arms against them. Their weapons, however, were flimsy and ineffective, both in attack and in defense. And indeed, war in the Americas is no more deadly than our jousting, or than many European children's games. And with their horses and swords and lances, the Spaniards easily fended them off, killing them, committing all kind of atrocities against them. They forced their way into native settlements, slaughtering everyone they found there, including small children, old men, pregnant women, and even women who had just given birth. They hacked them to pieces, slicing open their bellies with their swords as though they were so many sheep herded into a pen. They even laid wagers on whether they could manage to slice a man in two at a stroke, or cut an individual's head from his body, or dismember him with a single blow of their axes. They grabbed suckling infants by the feet and, ripping them from their mother's breast, dashed them headlong against the rocks. Others, laughing and joking all the while, threw them over their shoulders into a river, shouting, "Wiggle, you little perisher." They slaughtered anyone and everyone in their path, on occasion running through a mother and her baby with a single thrust of their swords. They spared no one, erecting especially wide gibbets on which they could spring their victims up with their feet just off the ground and then burn them alive, 13 at a time, in honor of our Savior and the 12 apostles, or tied dry straw to their bodies and set fire to it. Some they chose to keep alive and simply cut their wrists, leaving their hands dangling, saying to them, "Take this letter," meaning that their sorry conditions would act as a warning to those hiding in the hills. The way they normally dealt with the native leaders and nobles was to tie them to a kind of griddle consisting of sticks resisting on pitchforks driven into the ground, and then drill them over a slow fire. With the result that they howled in agony and despair as they died a lingering death. It once happened that I myself witnessed their grilling of 4 or 5 local leaders in this fashions. And I believe they had set up 2 or 3 other pairs of grills alongside so that they might process other victims at the same time. When the poor creature's howls came between the Spanish commander and his sleep, he gave orders that the prisoners were to be throttled. But the man in charge of the execution detail, who was more bloodthirsty than the average common hangman, I know his identity, and even met some relatives of his in Seville, was loath to cut short his private entertainment by throttling them, and so he personally went around ramming wooden thongs into their mouths to stop them making such a racket, and deliberately stoke the fire so that they would take just as long to die as he himself chose. I saw all these things for myself and many others besides. And since all those who could do so took to the hills and mountains in order to escape the clutches of these merciless and inhumane heathens, butchers, these mortal enemies of humankind, trained hunting dogs to track them down. Wild dogs who would savage a native to death as soon as look at him, tearing him to shreds and devouring his flesh as though he were a pig. These dogs wrought havoc among the natives and were responsible for much carnage. And when, as happened on the odd occasion, the locals did kill a European, as given the enormity of the crimes committed against them, they were in all justice fully entitled to. The Spanish came to an unofficial agreement among themselves that for every European killed, 100 natives would be executed. And here's a picture of what we just went over. You can see it here. You can see him dashing the little baby against the stone. It's that rock. You have natives just above the fire roasting. So it's a lot of pictures in this book. Besides what he's saying, they drew pictures to prove it. You can see the writing underneath it. So they don't teach this in the schools. But this is a European giving an account of what he's seen his people do.